All right. Welcome, guys. Good to have you all here. Thank you for coming. I want to also thank TaxBit for sponsoring our delicious lunch from Obetas today. Thank you so much. And we've got some folks from TaxBit here, and I invited them to take a few minutes to just tell us a little bit more about what they're doing. And I'm going to try to give them the mic. I think it would be easier if I just took it off of my body. There we go.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Hey guys, I'm Nikki Sanders, and I'm the head of blockchain research and development over at TaxBit. Over here. Sorry, guys. Yeah, so we're really happy to be here today and to sponsor this and to come out and meet people. We're doing a lot of cool blockchain development things at TaxBit, so if anyone's interested in helping us do some new chain integrations, cool smart contract, like research and maybe a little bit of development on that, cool new things coming out soon, come talk to us. We'd love to get you into the office and see how you guys can help us out. But yeah, everyone enjoy.
Anyone else from TaxBit coming? Or sorry.
Just the three of us.
Okay. All right, great. Just getting started, guys. I'm just going to make sure that the audio is working on the screen, guys. Just give me a second here.
Is this being streamed?
Yeah. It's streamed on our YouTube channel.
Cool, thanks.
Grab that. In fact, if anyone could actually go to our YouTube channel and double check it just to let me know if you're hearing audio. Yeah, I can start talking, but you can hear it?
Yeah.
Oh, sweet. Okay, we're good. Cool. All right, well, thanks for coming. So today we're talking again about building your first Dapp. And if you guys recall, last time we were working on the smart contract for this Dapp. And today we're going to look at how to connect it to a front end. And the front end is going to be built in React. So let's take a look at that. And I've kind of like been working through this. I mentioned earlier that I built this tutorial a couple years ago with Truffle, which was at the time sort of one of the most popular development kits for blockchain applications. And while Truffle's still, going strong and it's great if you want to use it, a lot of folks are also trying out Hard Hat these days. And so I decided to kind of rebuild it with Hard Hat. And the other thing was that my app had been built for a version of MetaMask that was like no longer easily available. So I kind of had to redo it anyway. And it's funny, like basically I had to rewrite the whole thing. So I've been in the process of the last few weeks kind of going through it and updating things. And I'll be sharing today some of the things that I've discovered as I've been doing that. So the last time we were here, we were in my first Dapp, I believe. And we're using Node Version Manager to manage our version of Node that we're developing with. Yeah, let me try to even bump this up bigger. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay.
Better for YouTube too.
Awesome. Okay. So one of the first things we want to do is we're going to just run the tests. Just want to make sure that our smart contract is still working. if you recall, the smart contract is mostly for informational purposes. I don't think you would necessarily use a smart contract to build this functionality, but the idea is that it supports functionality similar to what you'd see on Facebook, where you have the ability for users to create polls and then create several options for the poll, and then people can kind of click on each option, and you can see how many people voted for one option in the poll versus another. And this demo also has the feature that like any account that wants to interact with the smart contract can do so and create its own poll. So it demonstrates user interactivity. So if you had a really high value social media application, this might be the way you could implement such a thing. Now, but one of the reasons I say it maybe mostly for informational purposes is just that, you know, every transaction, every time you create a poll or you add an option to a poll or you vote on a poll, you would be spending a small amount of cryptocurrency or gas in order to interact with that poll. And on one of these alternate blockchains like Avalanche, it might be a few pennies. But if you were on Ethereum, like you might be paying like $50 to $100 just to create a poll, and then another one to just vote on a poll. And I don't know about you, but I can't think of a poll that I'm that excited about. So it anything on what we call layer 1, which is sort of the actual blockchain itself and the data that's being stored on the blockchain, is quite costly, because every activity, every action will actually be permanently stored in the blockchain data. And we also talked a little bit last time about state rent, the concept of, you know, this state of the blockchain is being basically stored in perpetuity. And so far, most blockchain protocols haven't yet dealt with the issue of how to handle this massively expanding state. And it, in terms of long-term viability for blockchain, some of the more philosophical discussions that are going on right now are around like, well, we've got to come up with something in the protocol that justifies each node operator in storing all this data forever, right? So it'd be like, rather than assuming that your blockchain data will always be there, you might have something like a cryptographic proof that demonstrates that the blockchain state is valid, but that doesn't store all of the old data, right? And then for as long as you wanted data to be there, you would have to pay some kind of a rent in the form of crypto of some kind in order to keep your data on there. But that's a topic that's kind of still being debated amongst like Ethereum enthusiasts and other blockchains as well. But that's kind of a long version of why you might want to use some off-chain thing or layer 2 thing to do an application like this. But for it helps for the informational purpose of like what we're learning today. So we verified that our tests can run, and when you run these tests in Hard Hat, it's not actually even hitting a blockchain. It's just like running a little internal version of a blockchain while the tests are running, and then as soon as the tests are over, it just exits. Another thing that we need to do is we want to run a local node. So I'm going to run npx hard hat node, and I just found out that I'm already running one. So I'm going to exit that one, and I'm going to run this one instead. And when I do this, I'm given 20 accounts each, and I'm shown what their private key is. You would never want to reveal the real private key to an account that you had actual funds in. But this creates a bunch of free accounts, each with 10,000 Ether in them, so you can just totally have a ball and use as much gas as you want to test your application. And so I've pre-programmed that gas into my MetaMask. And so what we're going to be using today is we're going to be browsing our Dapp. And MetaMask is kind of the tool of choice for interacting with a Dapp. And one trick that we might see when I try to run this is that sometimes when you just started your network again after it hadn't been running, but you've been in the middle of testing your app out, you might get an error. And that is because MetaMask sometimes will get into this weird setup where it assumes, it keeps some sort of internal state as to like the network it's been interacting with. And so you basically have to, the nonce is the more detailed response, but there's a number that gets incremented with each new interaction with the network that it's working with. And if it notices that the nonce doesn't match the nonce that's being given back by the network it's interacting with, it kind of complains and then dies. So what we do to fix that problem is we go into our MetaMask, we go to settings. I just clicked on the top right account thing there, and I go to advanced, and I go down here and I go reset account. And my MetaMask should now be good. And if I look, okay, it's trying to do something. So that first confirmation was just for it to install a little contract that it automatically runs, that Hard Hat prompts it to run, that allows it to kind of deploy a little internal contract that's used during Hard Hat development. So now I'm running with 10,000 fake ETH in my own little network, right? So that I can interact with that network. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is, last time we left this, we just close some of these other windows that I'm no longer using. So unfortunately, every new window that I open up has these small fonts again, so I've got to kind of like redo it. All right. And we had just barely created a front end.
Is this code on GitHub?
It is actually. In fact, let me share the location, the GitHub location of this stuff for you guys to make a note of. And what this GitHub location, by the way, is like where we'll end up when we're done today. So what I'm showing you is kind of like this makeshift thing. In fact, I left the code in the exact state it was when I left here. And if cross your fingers that like the demo gods won't fail me, because I might have I might miss something along the way. But hopefully by doing this, you guys can catch some of the sort of tips and tricks and maybe mistakes that you might make along the way if I make a mistake. So hopefully that's actually helpful. So one of the things we're going to do is we're going to go into our front end folder and we're going to run the actual application. So we've just got a default React app made with create React app. And the next thing we need to do is actually tell it how to interact with Hard Hat. So one of the first things I'm going to do is pull up my editor, and I'll have to have one more window, one more terminal session. Okay, so now I've got that app open, and I'm going to just try to bump up the font. Hopefully it won't require me to do that on every file. I guess it will. Okay. And I've got another editor open where I'll be copying some stuff from my working application. So one of the first things we want to do is we want to double check a couple of things in here. We're going to be using a tool called Krakow, and I just want to make sure that all of this stuff has been installed. So it has been installed. So I'm going to go and copy this file and create it. Some of this stuff is just kind of boilerplate. What was that? Craco.config.js. And we've got Tailwind already, and I think that's mostly ready to go. I'll just grab and pull in some Tailwind settings as well. And then one of the next things we want to do is we need to actually go into our source, and instead of kind of that default index page that was showing up, we want to declare some dependencies that are going to be used by our application. And one of the things we're going to bring in is from a framework called Use Dapp. Let me just show you guys this framework for a second, because it's going to be a big part of what we do. I'll add that to my list of things down here. So Use Dapp is really handy because it basically brings in some React hooks that allow you to interact with MetaMask and with your blockchain network and your contracts using the kind of the right React way to do it with the latest hook approach. So one of the things it does is we bring in this Dapp provider here, and we're wrapping our entire application with this Dapp provider, and it also has some config settings here. And one of the things I'm doing in the config settings is I am telling it which chains I support, and I'm also saying that I want to be notified when things happen on the blockchain, and giving it an interval with which those notifications will arrive. So this 1000 here indicates 1000 milliseconds or 1 second. So that just means that every second I'm going to get notifications about any changes to the state of the blockchain. So if like a new block has been cut or a new event got fired in my smart contract, that's roughly the interval with which I'll be notified by about those things. And this is important to think about because, of course, if you increase the interval, or if you increase the interval, it will take longer for your app to kind of show the user what's going on. If you decrease the interval, then your app will be basically chugging along and taking a lot more browser time and running more slowly. And then all blockchain dApps are pretty clunky in a way because blockchain blocks only get cut even on the fastest blockchains every few seconds. And so that means that you've got to do something for your user while you're waiting for the blockchain to kind of do its thing. And a lot of dApp developers aren't thinking about this quite enough. They're like, in a lot of dApps that I interact with when I'm doing DeFi investing or other things like that, I might spend $1,000 or something, quantities even larger than that, and be sitting there for like over a minute sweating bullets hoping that whatever I just did actually happened successfully. So we'll talk a little bit about that today, but always be thinking while I'm waiting for something to notify me on the blockchain level that it's happened, what am I doing to reassure my user that we know what they just did, that we planned for that, and that eventually they're going to get a response, and I'm showing some kind of progress indicator or something that makes the user sit tight and know that, you know, this is perfectly normal. I just spent $1 million, but I'm not going to, it's not going to go into the ether, it's going to, you know, come back to me somehow. All right, so with that set up there, then the next thing we're going to do is we are going to just bring in some of the Tailwind stuff for the styles instead of the default settings. And on our app, I'm going to bring in just a few little things. And I also want to, I don't need this CSS file, so I'm going to get rid of that. And for the time being, I am going to just comment out all of those inclusions there. And then instead here, I'm going to say, actually, we'll make this an H1 just to make it big. All right, so what I've done here is just created a really simple app that just has a header or a headline that says hello. And this will only show up, let's see, let me just put a footer or something at the bottom here. This hello will only show up if I'm actually signed, if I've connected MetaMask to the application. So one of the things that your Dapp does is, it used to not be this way, but they realize now that, I mean, it used to be that just visiting a website with your MetaMask on essentially automatically revealed the existence of your wallet to the website. But that was considered a bit of a privacy violation because, you know, you could essentially, I don't know, store any wallet you'd ever seen and then just see if someone had a lot of funds in the wallet and, I don't know something about them. So now instead it asks the permission of the user before they connect their MetaMask. And so if you successfully connect your MetaMask, then this thing should show up. So what we're going to do here is we're going to get that working, all right? So let's first see where we're at in terms of what our React app is doing. So I'm going to refresh the page, and we got an error deploying the multi-call contract. I am just going to double check how we're doing here.
So Carl, just by including that use Dapp, it automatically prompted them to connect the wallet?
Well, I'll show you in just a sec, but we actually need to stick something on the website itself that,
You know, let's say set the button to say.
yeah, the button. Yeah, that's right. So I haven't yet set that up. You could actually forego that and make it so that just going to the website automatically prompted a connection, but that's a little less user-friendly, so I wouldn't recommend it. So the first error I'm getting is that the expected chain ID is not what I'm actually running. And I did see this error before, and the way that I fixed it was by, I think I changed something in one of these configurations. Let me just see where it was. There was some setting that I needed to. There's a declaration in one of the config settings, and I'm trying to remember where it is. Oh, it's in the hard hat config. That's right. Where we just set the chain ID down here. So I'm going to update the hard hat config on this app and paste in that chain ID setting. And I think I'm going to need to restart the node again. So I'm going to do that. 1337, what? Well, that's what's weird. It's assuming that it's that, but for some reason that is not working. So I found someone who's reporting the same error, and they said, just change your chain ID to 1337. The names of some of the networks that are built into Ethereum are based on leet speak. So 1337 is like, if you're really cool hacker, then you have that code. It's like, if you look at it sideways, it looks like leet. Yeah, Eric? Yeah. All right, so now that I've set that up, now that I've restarted, let's go back to our MetaMask. We're going to probably need to reset MetaMask. Probably. Oh, we didn't. Okay. So we now have both of them are showing up. And let's now look at what I think I've previously connected to this application, which is why it's showing my account there. But if I hadn't connected, we'd see something different. But the next thing we're going to do here is we're going to set up a header that has that button that says connect with the application, right? So let's go and do that now. And I will try to remember to bump up the fonts here. Sorry, guys. I know it's a bit. All right. So the next thing I'm going to do is bring in this header. And I'm going to include this header in my application. And it is looking for something called account profile, so let's bring that in as well. All right. And finally, it wants a logo, so we're going to do one more thing as well. Oh, all right, that is not. Okay, so we're making some progress, although there's some missing CSS, I believe. So let me just make sure that we've run all the right things to install. Yeah?
I think you can package that JSON, you can change the start command to Krakow instead of run.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, we also need to update that. Good call, thank you. So after doing that, I'm going to just run npm. I think I'm already on the right version, but npm install, just to make sure that all of my packages are up to date in this application. And we'll just want to make sure that Tailwind is there. Yeah, I'm seeing it. Yes, probably. Good call. Hey, awesome. That's looking a little bit more like what we want. And you see that I have this connect disconnect thing here. I had already interacted with this app in the past, so it sort of recognized me. But if I click disconnect, then I've designed this header so that, and I can bump this up so you can see it a little better. I've designed this header so that the first thing you would see if you were to come cold to the app is kind of something about the app, but then a connect button. And if I click connect, normally my MetaMask would prompt me at that point. My MetaMask would say, do you want to connect to this site? And then then if I said yes, then it would come to this page. The idea here is that I'm sort of pretending like this user has logged in at that point. And if I wanted to, I could store additional information about this user if they're willing to share it with me. So in this case, we could pretend that the user's uploaded an avatar and they've shared a few things about them. And then when they connected their MetaMask, we recognized that account and we said, oh, let's pull up the avatar we have for that user. All right, so the next step then is that we are going to basically want to show to the user some things that allow them to interact with the app. So one of the things we're going to do is we only want certain things to appear if the user is connected. So because if the user hasn't connected, then there's no point in trying to load data that we wouldn't be able to pull up anyway. So the wrapper class that I've created, this wrapper component, it will help us do that. So let's expose just that thing. I guess, and just something else here. Inside wrapper. And let's also bring the wrapper in, the functionality of the wrapper. And we'll walk through that in a sec here. So the wrapper is pretty simple. In fact, as I look at this, I don't even think that I was doing any functionality around stuff that I wanted to display only if the user was signed in, but this was more just a way of, containing my surrounding HTML in a separate component. So as I refresh my memory, there's not a whole lot left over there. All right, so we now want to just go to here and these need to be commented out properly. Okay, so we now see just that the inside of the wrapper class is being displayed. We've got this header showing a list of polls, but nothing really inside of it yet. And some of the temporary HTML that we had created just while we were playing around with things, we can get rid of that now, this footer and hello. You can see that if I disconnect, that disappears, and if I connect, it comes back. So essentially, we've already verified that all the interior of that Dapp provider essentially disappears when we're no longer connected. The next real thing to do is we want to make a component that allows us to create a new poll, all right? So that's kind of what we'll do next here. And I can explain in more detail what's going on as we get into these new components. So we'll call this polls.js. Now, one important thing that we need to do is I just remembered, we haven't actually deployed our contract to this example network that I created. So remember I tested the contract and we verified that some of the functionality was working as expected. I don't know if you can see that. It should be back in the history here. Right there, we ran the tests and they're all passing. But now I actually need to deploy. And the way that we deploy, this was another issue that I ran into earlier, is we need to specify which network we're deploying on. So I had been running this command to deploy my contract, but I hadn't specified network localhost on it, and it was telling me that it was working. But then when I went to interact with the contract, I was getting errors. It turns out that when you tell Hardhat to run a script, it runs it against some play imaginary network that is only running while that script is running. Just to verify that the logic of the script is functionally sound. But it doesn't actually attempt to connect to another running network unless you specify that you want to access that network. So by adding this -- network localhost, that way I'm making sure that I'm connecting to the network that's running outside of all this. So I am going to bring this script in. It's called deploy polls, and we will run that. And I'll show you what that does. So this basically retrieves my polls contract. It calls a deploy function on it, and then it takes the contract and converts it into, it basically creates a data structure that contains the new address of the contract where it was deployed. So every time you deploy a contract, it has an address. And then it also takes the structure of the contract when it's compiled, which is called an ABI. And it saves all that to a file called polls.json in the front end folder. And the reason for that is so that my front end actually knows how to connect to the contract. So when I run this script, I thought I'd just... Oh, you're right. Let me go in there instead. All right. So it now deploys that to this address, and that contract, we can see also that it actually did something because we see that a contract deployment has occurred in the console of the network. So my contract is there. I now have this polls.json file, and as you can see here, that file contains the address of the contract and the ABI that my app will need to connect to it later. All right, so now that I've done that, then my polls listing, let's see, should be able to list all the polls that exist, and there shouldn't be any polls, so we'll see what happens now. But I am referring to one other thing that is not there yet. I meant to do the polls first, but I did the new poll. Let me pull that in first, I guess. So if I go to the new poll component, I'm going to copy this and create a new poll. Now this thing for creating a new poll has several dependencies that we're going to need to pull in as well. All right. New poll is not defined, so we need to make sure we're including it also, importing it. Now, new poll refers to some hooks that we're going to create that are going to really have most of the logic for how to create a brand new poll and add some options to it. So let's get started doing that now. So I'm going to create a folder in here for my hooks, and oh yeah, thank you. Cancel. And I'm going to create an index.js file in there. And this will just be including some of the things we're needing here. But all I'm going to use for the beginning is this create poll hook. And so let's take a look at what this is doing for a minute here. So this hook is being used to create a brand new poll. And if you look at the contract first creates a poll and assigns to it a title, a question that's being asked of the poll, the name of the person who's posting the poll, just so that I can conveniently display it. And that's it. I'm also having the user specify some options they want to add to the poll, some responses that the user could select. But that doesn't get created first. The actual create poll method on the contract, if we pull up the contract really fast, we can take a look at it. So if I look at create poll here, we just get the title, the question, and the owner name. It creates that. And then later on, if you want to add actual options to the poll, you have to specify the ID of the poll you want to add an option to and the string that you want to add. So the process of creating a poll is actually a multi-step process. And you're basically going to first create the poll, then create each option. And this will be a good way of us learning how we do a multi-step process in a Dapp. So I'm going to show that now. Basically, if we go back to our hook, we've got in here, we're using a part of the use Dapp core, we're using something called use contract function, right? This basically is how we connect to a method that's on our smart contract. So I first have to read in that ABI from the polls.json file that got saved in the folder. I also have to read in the address, and I have to generate a new contract object from both of those things. And then that gets passed into this use contract function hook, as well as the name of the function I want to call on my smart contract. And I can even specify a special transaction name that will be included in any notifications that come through, so that I can basically filter those notifications on a certain event. I am also going to grab the method for adding an option to a contract that already exists. So I'm grabbing these two methods from my smart contract. And then I'm doing another hook to keep track of the options. And the reason for this is that when I attempt to create the poll, I want to store those options in a state variable so that I can, after the poll is successfully created, I can then go and refer to that state variable to add the options without the user having to do any extra work, basically. So if we look at the create poll method down here, it basically iterates over the options and calls the set function for that hook to store those off somewhere. Those get stored in a state variable. Then it sets, formats the title and the name to be in a bytes format that Solidity requires for that to look right. So it basically stores them in bytes, retrieves them in bytes, and then translates them for the user to see. And then finally, it returns the actual method that calls the contract. This is a promise, by the way. It's not for those of you who know JavaScript, it's not a method that will get called immediately. It returns a method that can be called at a later time, right? So this whole hook returns that method, create poll. It also returns a status of both of those options so that your app can kind of show the user what's going on while these things are happening. So that is a basic rundown of what's happening in this hook. And then if we go to the new poll component, we can see that we've got some HTML here that basically has some inputs for the poll's title, its question, and then the options that we want to give it, and then a button to click. And when it's all, when the button is clicked, some state variables are being used to track, like whether we're in the middle of processing that transaction or whether we're done and we've succeeded. And one other thing you can see here is that if we've successfully created a poll, I get that event through notifications, and I reset the title, questions, and options back to 0 so that essentially that form clears itself out so that the next time, so that after I create one poll, I can create another one pretty quickly. So one other thing that is worth noting is that I'm using this state hook to track the input variables, like what the user has entered, the title, the question, the options. And when this add option method is used to just create new inputs. I'll show you this in a sec. You can see that I'm referring to my hook here. I'm actually referring to that hook, grabbing the create poll, its status, as well as the add option status. And when that button gets clicked on to add a new poll is where I call that method create poll. And I pass to it the title of the question, as the name of the person, as well as the options that I want to send. So let's take a look at my app. Use create poll is not exported from hooks. Let's just see what's going on there. Looks like it's being exported to me.
Because you're exporting it as create poll instead of use create poll.
Let's see. I don't think so. I mean, it's on.
Are you importing it as a default in the JavaScript file?
Let's see. Let me just do one other thing here. I don't know what's going on there, but sometimes restarting just is what you got to do, right? All right, so you can now see my form for a new poll. And if I want to add extra options, I can click the plus here and I get several options, right? So I'm going to say my cool poll is the title. I'm going to say, what is your favorite color? And, oh, what happened there? That was weird. I think there's some logic that's a little bit odd in the thing that resets stuff. Let me just double check here. Create poll, yeah. All right, so when I click add, MetaMask gets prompted to confirm that I want to actually execute a transaction.
Is that just something that the Dapp library does for you?
Yeah,
When you call a function on your...
that's right. So by using the use contract function here, when I call the promise that gets returned by that, it automatically knows to pull up MetaMask, basically. Now, let me show you what else is happening here. So after this create poll method gets called successfully, one of the things that we do is we are checking the events. So you'll see that, where is it? See how I have this events attribute here in my call to use contract function? This basically says, like, store things that happen in the contract in this events state variable. And I can then basically watch that state variable to see if it changes. And whenever it changes, I then look to see if the event that I got was poll modified. And in this particular case, when you successfully create a poll, it returns the ID of the new poll that's been created. This is really actually important because the only way for me to know what poll to add options to is to grab that ID from a previous transaction. But a transaction could take several seconds or even a minute to finish. And so events are pretty much the way that Ethereum contracts inform you about things that happen, right? So we will use this event to get the ID of the poll we just created. And then, as you can see here, once I get that, I iterate over all of the options that I've stored previously, and I call a new method for adding those. So I get automatically prompted for each option that I want to add. So you saw there that I had 3 options that I wanted to add. And this shows you how to do a multi-step process in a Dapp, right? Another thing that I did in there that's kind of hard to tell, but if you look at the new poll, I have these is mining status here that I'm tracking. If we look at is mining, it is basically just something that looks at the status of that create poll method or the status of the add option method and sees if either of them is set to the state of mining. That kind of comes with used app as well. And if it does, I'm displaying a little spinner, and I'm also disabling the button so the user can't like click on it and spam the button while I'm waiting for something else to happen. It happens so fast in this local network because the local simulation of the network basically creates a new block immediately as soon as you submit a transaction, just to make it faster for your user experience. But if we were doing this on a real test network or a live network, we would see that spinner up for quite a while we're waiting for the transaction to complete. So that's just also showing you kind of how to make sure that your user is informed while different things are going through. But as you can see, we're not displaying the poll yet. So let's now add the logic to display those polls after they get created. And then that's where we'll wrap up today. Okay, so the last thing we want to do is iterate over the polls and retrieve them. And for that, we're going to create another hook for getting the poll data. All right, and we will export that as well. And just to give you a quick rundown of what's going on here, I am creating a hook to get a count of how many polls there are, and also then creating a hook for retrieving the data about those polls. This essentially iterates over all the polls that are in the contract and then populates that data into a local variable that then gets returned to the application. Then if we look at the polls component itself, it basically just iterates over those polls and displays them for the user here. So let's take a look at that and make sure that that is also in our app. So we'll uncomment this line. And I don't know, let's see, we've got to import it as well. All right. And then I'm going to just get rid of this inside wrapper because it's not needed anymore. So we now see that the poll is being displayed. This is sort of left as an exercise for you guys, but the functionality to then allow you to vote on a poll and display the results, I haven't yet gotten that portion working on the new version of the app. But I hope that what I've shown you today gives you enough of a concept of basically how you connect your front end to a blockchain network and how you interact with smart contracts, even with multi-step processes, kind of showing the user the progress as you go. And for fun, now that the app's all put together, we'll do one more poll. What should we call this poll, guys? All right, food, awesome food poll. Do you like lunch? Did you like lunch today? Yes. Thanks, TaxBit. No, it was not up to my standards. Or I'm a vegetarian. I guess we did have some vegetarian options. All right, anyway, we'll add that. And you did see that hopefully you saw that little blip of like the spinner going there. And it's there. So as you can see, the app is now responding in real time, updating itself, all of that kind of thing. And with that, I will thank you, and please mingle with one another after this. I do want to say before we close, I love the opportunity to do some homework and then share my findings with you guys each month, but I would love to have some help as well. So if any of you have some cool things you're working on, we would love to see them. especially companies in the area who are building cool stuff. We'd love to have you come share and present. So the idea here is to kind of grow this beyond just me. So what I've done here in my first, have you guys heard the story of the parable of the stone soup? Right? Basically, a man walks into a town square with a huge cauldron, right? And he lights a fire under the cauldron and pours a bunch of water in the cauldron. And someone says, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm making soup." And they're like, "Oh, that's awesome. What's in it?" He's like, "Well, just this rock that I put in it, you know." And they're like, "Well, that's not going to taste very good, you know." And then someone says, "Hey, I've got some carrots. I'm going to go get them," right? And then someone else says, "Hey, I've got some potatoes and onions." And, you know, people each go and grab the things that they have. And pretty soon, all the last step that's left is just to take that rock out of the bottom and then serve up some delicious soup. So the parable of the stone soup is about a community kind of gathering around a central activity, right, and getting going. So this is my meager offering of a stone for you guys to add your carrots and potatoes to. All right? But thanks so much for coming. And one other question I have for you guys is, do you want to meet in December, or do you want to get together next month as well?
Yes.
Awesome. Do we have any volunteers for a potential presenter? Yeah? What would you like to share with us?
I'm actually working on some projects.
Uh-huh.
A couple of projects, one on Polygon chain, another on Avalanche.
Awesome.
On the Avalanche, we did pretty good. Like my project did like $20 million market cap.
Nice.
And we almost struck a deal with Ava Labs.
Mm-hmm. Really cool. Yeah, I'd love to have you share what you did. Are there any technical aspects of it you could share with us?
Not technical. I hire developers.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, that would be cool.
But it's yield. The projects are yield farming.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, this whole meetup is mostly about like how to build stuff. So the more building details you can give us, the better. In fact, if you had one of your devs that you're partnering with, if they could even like tag team it with you and share how, like maybe you could share how it works, and then they could talk a little bit about how it was done.
My developers, they work remote.
Yeah, so I've tested a setup where I can have some speakers down here, and we can have them up on like Zoom or whatever, and the audience can interact with them. So we could do a portion of the presentation remotely if that works for you. Is lunchtime a time that's not an ungodly hour for these folks?
My Dave's in Hong Kong.
That's hard. Okay, well let's talk afterwards about how we might be able to make that presentation pretty awesome. Ryan, did you raise your hand as well?
I was just thinking it would be great if we could have like lightning, like 15-minute,
Yeah.
several of them or something like that, because I'm sure there's a bunch of people.
Yeah,
doing
that
stuff.
I welcome whatever, like whatever format we have. That's great. Fox, did you have some?
Yeah, I could do one about NFTs, using games and things like that if anyone's interested.
I think that'd be awesome. Actually, I think a lot of folks would be interested in that. Some other topics that I've thought about, just briefly. So the graph is one that a lot of developers use to kind of cache the results from a contract so that it's easier to interact with the contract and retrieve data. Stuff. Awesome. Also some stuff about like, if you have a protocol or an application that needs to store data off-chain, but you want to make it as decentralized as possible, where do you put that data, right? So there are some remote storage protocols like IPFS and Swarm that I've been wanting to learn more about so that I can build a fully decentralized protocol that requires some off-chain storage. So that's another topic that would be really cool. Anything about like how to make your Dapp more scalable, about compromises between full decentralization and practically functioning apps, stuff like that. Love to get presentations like that. All of the like tricks and tips that we need for like real world app building would be totally welcome. So I know the Relium guys are building something awesome. If you could share any ideas with anything with us, that would be cool too. Awesome. Cool. Well, let's keep these conversations going. I'll be in touch with all of you guys, and we'll try to keep more cool presentations flowing. But thank you so much today, and thanks again to TaxBit for sponsoring the lunch. And there's more food, so please grab some. And with that, thank you. That's weird. Thanks, Nikki. Thanks. All right, so we can now just